So Martin, can you please describe e-waste a little bit, in which markets the company operates, which sectors?
Sure, happy to. Well, first of all, the company is a U.S. listed company, but yet in terms of where we operate, from a geographic standpoint, we operate here in the UK, in the US, and in China, with partners in other parts of the globe. The company's focus is on the electronic waste and reverse logistics industry.
Okay.
And that's a largely ignored and overlooked part of the electronics industry for the last 50 years. And we're focused on consolidating this space by bringing complementary geographies and complementary technology companies together into one integrated organization.
Can you give an example of the technologies that you bring together?
Yeah, sure. The fact is there's very good engineering out there now available that's often unknown that allows the complete recovery of all of the component materials in electronics, everything from the precious metals through to the plastics and glass and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So we established a very high compliant mantra that says let's use that technology to effectively do above ground mining.
Yeah.
So we'll take a ton of electronics, and we'll harvest more, for example, gold and precious metals out of it than you get from digging 17 tons of ore out of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of it, is engineering technologies like that. And then there are other technologies applied to the near end of life product. Some of the products are not quite ready to be ground up and harvested for commodities. They can be refurbed, resold, remarketed, reused. So you have to apply very good data destruction technologies and so on to those. And the process of maintaining for the first user that product before it becomes obsolete is also part of the solution set. So all those are technology based.
And what are the regulatory issues that you might have?
They're pretty significant, and we embrace those because we think that for years, unfortunately, most of the Western countries have been dumping unwanted electronics on third world countries for way too long. Finally, led by the European Union, regulations have been put in place which prohibit that kind of dumping, which we embrace. And there also are now more regulations than ever about what happens from transshipping and from processing, and those are significant. But these technologies that we have access to make it so we don't have to apologize. You don't have to plead for any forgiveness in any of that to go around or try and work through the authorities' obligations that are imposed, and you can absolutely adopt those and make that part of the cornerstone of the operation.
And what are the markets that are more regulated than others?
Well, in the e-waste part of it, first of all, geographically, Europe is far more regulated than any other part of the world. The U.S. is state by state regulated, and only about half of the states have put regulations in place. Other countries are adopting at a different rate, so from a geopolitical standpoint, the regulations are not consistent, but they are there. From a functional standpoint, the regulations typically wrap around obligations to avoid landfill, because the poisons and the toxins which can naturally leach from these types of products are quite profound and deadly to the environment. So most of the legislation has involved some aspect of anti-landfill aspects to it. Rest of them tend to relate to processing techniques or obligations to do avoidance of transshipping internationally to unwanted locations and so on. We expect there are going to be even more.
Okay. So you mentioned the geographies where the company is present in. What are the next opportunities for the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, for us, the two single biggest opportunities are in the U.S. and China. Europe is a massive opportunity, but because the European Union did a great job of leading the effort to get into this, there are fewer lead opportunities for us. There'll be great partnership opportunities here. But the marketplaces themselves are so vast in the U.S. and China for electronics, and so we've chosen to put a significant amount of our attention there. Not exclusively, of course, because we've got partners around the globe. But we will focus a lot of energy in the next 12, 18 months on consolidating further in the U.S. and China.
Can you give a bit an overview of the competitive landscape in those regions? Who are the main players there?
Yeah, well, the fact is that there are a couple of very big players who are publicly traded, and I don't want to share names to talk about other companies, but there are only about 3 or 4 which are of any size. But if you measure those who are the biggest, and there are a couple of divisions of of listed companies, even their market shares are only 2 or 3%, maybe 5% in some regions. So what it argues is that the marketplace is very fragmented. Most of the operators are very small. The vast majority are finding a way, because they can, to skirt the regulations and obligations that they have. And those that are mid-size, respectable companies and so on, frankly, are the ones that are our targets. And so we'll be going after many of those companies to either partner or buy.
How big is the market in China and the US?
It's huge. You can measure it a bunch of different ways, but we believe that globally, the market is at least $50 billion annually, US dollars. When you look at just the commodity waste stream, it's about $10 billion. And the US and China are roughly equivalent in size. In fact, US, China, and Europe are all roughly equivalent in size. And that typically is measured as well, but in millions of pounds of waste generated per year. And that runs in the range of about 10 million tons in China, in the US, and Europe, almost respectively.
So none of the biggest players have like a huge market share?
Nobody has a huge market share. That's why we consider this industry to be so fragmented, and frankly, that's why we're involved.
And what are the barriers at the entry for a new player to come in?
Well, the barriers to entry are changing right now. They used to be without legislation, there were very little. Anybody could get involved in taking scrap electronics and try and grab a penny out of it in some fashion. And that still happens to a large degree because there's no prohibition about taking somebody's end-of-life gear and remarketing it, for example, reselling it. So there's very little barrier to entry in that respect. But to create a company of scale and size, the barriers to entry are going to include all of the legislative requirements now being imposed. So you've got to be willing to adopt that and put in place infrastructure for it. And certainly it's going to be a capital requirement because to get maximum value out of the underlying product, you're going to have to invest in plant and equipment, which is not inexpensive. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have to invest in professional staff that can manage and carry on and operate. And as technologies continue to develop, what we intend to be doing to differentiate and create further barriers is to own some of those technologies so that they're ours. And that means it'll make it more difficult for some to get into it. They may choose to partnership with us or something, but there will be those technology barriers which are looming as well too.
So IP is a pretty big topic at the moment then?
IP is an important topic. It's a growing topic. There are not enough companies who can afford to put the investment in, so that means they're not able to do the research very well as well too. But we're involved in that. We have our own e-plant technologies, for example, which we branded. We're participating in a number of very esoteric studies, for example, in rare earths, to figure out if there's an opportunity to extract rare earth materials. We're looking carefully at the lead extraction processes. So there's some very different technologies out there that need to be addressed, and we think that many of these will become economically productive in the next year or two.
What's most important when you look at a company is the technology, the management, the access to the market? What are the main considerations for you?
People, people, and people. It starts with people. You've got to have good people in these organizations, and the relationships that they have with their employees, the relationships all they have with their customers and the suppliers, that's absolutely critical. You can get drunk with enthusiasm about the financials of a particular target, but if it's not run by quality people, it's not a deal worth doing. So we start with the people, start and end with the people. And then in between, if they've got complementary geographies or technologies which complement ours, then we're quite interested, and we don't have a limit on where we can focus. Including size. We'll look at companies from very small, because often we have to get a quality company, just isn't a big one available, to companies of very, very large scale. And we have a skill set in our team. We've got experience of hundreds of acquisitions that have been done by me personally and by the rest of our team. So we have the capabilities to look at these companies with an open eye.